The galaxy had known fear for 12,000 years. Every species that looked up at the stars knew one truth above all others. The Vraekther were coming. They were always coming. And when they arrived, there were only two choices: serve or die. The Vraekther stood 9 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in black exoskeletons, harder than most metals. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could cut through starship walls like paper. Their jaws could crush bones and bend steel. Evolution had made them perfect killers. They had no natural enemies. They feared nothing. For 12,000 years, they had conquered every species they found. Some they ate. Some they enslaved. Some they kept as tribute, forcing them to give resources and soldiers to the Vraekther war machine. The Galactic Council was not a council of equals. It was a collection of 37 conquered species who existed only because the Vraekther allowed them to exist. The Vraekther called themselves the Eternal Alphas, the top of the food chain, the end point of evolution. No one in the galaxy dared to disagree. Their war fleets had never lost a battle. Their hunting grounds covered 200 star systems. When they spoke, the galaxy listened. When they demanded, the galaxy obeyed. Supreme Fang Corbax was the ruler of the Vraekther Dominion. He had led his people for 300 years. He had personally killed thousands of enemies with his own claws. He had eaten the leaders of 6 different species. He was the most feared being in known space when his long-range sensors detected radio signals coming from an unremarkable yellow star in an uncharted sector. He barely looked at the report. His advisors told him about a small blue planet orbiting this star. The inhabitants had primitive technology. They had only recently learned to leave their own world. They called themselves humans. Corbax made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. Another primitive species, another easy conquest. He would add them to the tribute worlds and never think of them again. He sent a scout fleet of 40 warships. It was more than enough. It was actually too many. 20 ships could have conquered most species. 40 was simply a show of overwhelming force designed to break the spirit of the prey before the hunting even began. The fleet traveled through hyperspace for several weeks. When they emerged near the blue planet called Earth, the Vraekther commanders expected to find chaos. Primitive species always panicked when they saw Vraekther warships. They would detect strange vessels in their skies. Their communication networks would fill with terror, and their leaders would beg for mercy before the first shot was fired. But something was wrong. The humans did not panic. There were no confused transmissions, no frantic calls between their governments. Instead, the Vraekther detected organized military formations moving into position around the planet. Defense platforms that had been hidden on the far side of their moon powered up and aimed at the Vraekther fleet. Thousands of smaller vessels launched from hidden bases on nearby asteroids. The humans had been watching them come for 3 years. They had tracked the Vraekther fleet since it entered their sensor range, and they had used every single day to prepare. Fleet Commander Vornok was confused, but not worried. Superior technology would win. It always did. He ordered his communications officer to broadcast the standard subjugation demands. A holographic image of Vornok appeared on every screen on Earth. His massive form, his gleaming black exoskeleton, his 4 arms spread wide to display his claws. Behind him, the bridge of his warship showed dozens of Vraekther warriors. The message was simple. The same message the Vraekther had sent to 37 species before. Surrender immediately. Provide tribute in the form of resources and labor. Accept Vraekther rule. Any resistance would result in the destruction of major population centers. Vornok waited for the fear. He waited for the begging. He waited for the leaders of this small blue world to fall over themselves, offering everything they had in exchange for survival instead. A single transmission came back. A human appeared on screen. He was small by Vraekther standards, soft-skinned, no claws, no armor. He wore a simple military uniform covered in medals. His hair was gray with age, but his eyes held something that Vornok had never seen in prey before. The human was smiling, not the smile of fear, Not the nervous grin of a creature trying to appease a predator. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. Someone who was exactly where they wanted to be. The human spoke in a calm voice that was translated by the ship's computers. He introduced himself as General Marcus Chen, Supreme Commander of Earth's United Defense Force. He said he had received the Vraekther demands. He said he had consulted with the leaders of every nation on his planet. Then he said 5 words that would echo through history. You picked the wrong species. Ornock did not understand. He ordered his officers to verify the translation. They confirmed it was accurate. The human was refusing to surrender. More than that, he was threatening them. General Chen continued speaking. He explained that humanity had detected the Vraekther 3 years ago. They had spent those 3 years studying every piece of information they could find about the Dominion. They had interviewed traders from conquered species who had visited Earth. They had intercepted Vraekther communications. They had learned about the 12,000 years of conquest, and they had decided it would not be the 38th species to fall. Chen said that humanity had a long history. They had fought each other for thousands of years. They had survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and disasters that killed millions. They had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons. But they were still here. They were always still here. The general leaned forward, his smile never fading. He told Vornok that the Vraekther had made a mistake. They had assumed that all species responded to threats the same way. They had assumed that showing overwhelming force would create surrender. But humans were different. When humans saw overwhelming force, they did not surrender. They got angry. They got creative. They found ways to win that their enemies never expected. Chen ended the transmission with a simple statement. The Vraekther had 40 ships. Earth had been building weapons for 3 years. If the Vraekther wanted a war, humanity would give them one. And it would be a war unlike anything the Dominion had ever experienced. Vornek cut the transmission and stared at his officers. None of them had ever seen prey behave this way. It was wrong. It went against everything they understood about the natural order. The fleet commander made his decision. He would teach these humans what happened to species that defied the Vraekther. He would burn their cities. He would break their spirit. He would drag their leaders before Supreme Fang, Korvax in chains. He gave the order to attack. It was the last order he would ever give. Human defense platforms opened fire. Missiles streaked through the void. And the galaxy's most feared predators learned their first lesson about humanity. Being the biggest and strongest did not mean you were the smartest. And in war, smart mattered more than strong. The hunt had begun. But for the first time in 12,000 years, the Vraekther were not the hunters. They were the prey. The first battle was supposed to last a few hours. It lasted 11 months. Supreme Fang Korvax received the reports from the Sol system with growing confusion. His scout fleet had been destroyed, not defeated. Not forced to retreat, destroyed. 40 warships, reduced to burning metal and frozen bodies drifting through the void of space. He sent a larger fleet. 200 warships with the best commanders in the Dominion. They arrived at Earth expecting a broken species ready to surrender. Instead, they found a species that had spent the time between battles learning, adapting, and building. The humans had lost many ships in the first engagement, but they had recovered every piece of Vraekther wreckage they could find. They had studied alien weapons, shields, and engines. They had taken technology that the Vraekther had developed over thousands of years and figured out how it worked in just a few weeks. By the time the second fleet arrived, human ships had upgraded armor. Their weapons fired faster. Their shields held longer. They were still weaker than Vraekther vessels, but the gap was closing. And it was closing fast. Korvax could not understand what he was seeing. He had conquered 37 species. He knew how prey behaved. When you killed enough of them, they broke. When you destroyed their fleets, they surrendered. When you burned their cities, they begged for mercy. The humans did none of these things. When Vraekther plasma cannons melted through human hull plating, human engineers designed new armor within 6 weeks. They used materials that reflected energy weapons. They redesigned their ships to spread damage across multiple sections instead of concentrating it in one place. They learned and adapted faster than any species the Vrakther had ever encountered. When Vrakther boarding parties cut through airlocks and stormed into human ships, they expected easy slaughter. The Vrakther were bigger, stronger, and had natural weapons built into their bodies. Hand-to-hand combat had always been their advantage, but humans did not fight hand-to-hand. They fought with traps and explosives and poisoned gas. They rigged corridors to collapse. They vented atmosphere to suck Vrakther warriors into space. And when all else failed, human soldiers would activate explosives strapped to their own bodies, killing themselves and every enemy around them. The Vrakther had never seen prey willing to die just to take a few predators with them. It was not natural. It was not how the universe worked. Prey was supposed to run, hide, or surrender. Prey was not supposed to smile as they pressed the detonation button. Korvax sent more ships. He sent his best warriors. He sent commanders who had never lost a battle, and slowly, gradually, they began to gain ground. Human losses mounted. Their fleet shrank. Victory seemed close. Then 3 new human carriers appeared from hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt. Then 5 more from bases on the moons of Jupiter. Then a dozen more from facilities scattered across the outer planets. Humanity had been building in secret. They had hidden their true strength. They had let the Vrakther think they were winning while they prepared for a longer war. The war entered its 2nd year. Korvax committed more resources than he had used against any species in history. He sent hundreds of warships, millions of warriors, and enough firepower to crack planets. And still the humans fought. What truly disturbed the Supreme Fang was something his advisors could not explain. By every measure they used, humanity should have broken. They had lost 60% of their initial fleet. Their casualties numbered in the millions. Their outer colonies had been destroyed, their stations burned, their people scattered. Any other species would have surrendered at 30% losses. Humanity had lost twice that, and their attacks had only grown more fierce. Korvax demanded answers. He ordered his scientists to study human biology. He had prisoners brought before him for interrogation. He needed to understand what made this species different. His scientists reported that humans were physically unremarkable. They were slower than many species, weaker than most. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom, no special abilities. By every measure, they should have been easy prey. But there was one thing that made them different. Humans had evolved on a death world. Earth was not a gentle planet. It had ice ages that covered continents, supervolcanoes that blocked the sun for years, diseases that killed millions in months, predators that hunted humans for thousands of generations, natural disasters that struck without warning, and through all of it, humans had survived. They had not survived by being the strongest or the fastest. They had survived by being the most stubborn creatures in the galaxy. They simply refused to die. Korvax finally brought a captured human before his throne. She was a pilot whose ship had been disabled and boarded. She had killed 6 VRCR warriors with a combination of firearms, explosives, and a broken piece of metal before being subdued. Even now, covered in blood from a dozen wounds, she stood without fear. The Supreme Fang studied her with his 4 eyes. He asked her why her species kept fighting. He explained that resistance was pointless. The Vrakther had more ships, more warriors, more resources. Mathematics said humanity would lose. Logic said humanity should surrender. The pilot laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the laugh of someone who had stopped being afraid a long time ago. She told Korvax that he did not understand humans. She explained that our ancestors had crossed oceans in wooden ships, knowing that most of them would die. They had climbed mountains where 90% of expeditions ended in death. They had explored frozen wastelands, burning deserts, deep caves filled with poison gas. Humans did not know how to quit, she said. They had never evolved that instinct. When something tried to kill them, they did not run. They adapted. They learned. They overcame. And they kept going until either they won or they died. She looked at the Supreme Fang with eyes that held no fear. She told him that he should have done his research before attacking Earth. He would have learned that humans had a saying. It was carved into the walls of their ancient temples and printed on the banners of their armies. What does not kill me makes me stronger. The Vrakther had failed to kill humanity. And now humanity was getting stronger every single day. Every battle taught them new lessons. Every defeat showed them new weaknesses to fix. Every dead human made the survivors more determined. The pilot smiled through bloody teeth. She told Korvax that he had made a terrible mistake. He had woken something that should have been left sleeping. He had poked the most stubborn species in the universe and expected them to behave like normal prey. She had one final message for the Supreme Fang. Humanity was not just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. And once humans decided to win, nothing in the galaxy could stop them. Korvax ordered her executed. But as his warriors dragged her away, he felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of rule, for the first time in his long life. The Supreme Fang of the Vrakther Dominion felt the cold touch of doubt. The war entered its third year, and the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. The Galactic Council had existed for thousands of years. 37 species sat in its halls, speaking when the Vrakther allowed them to speak, voting when the Vrakther allowed them to vote. They had all accepted their place in the natural order. The Vrakther were the apex predators. Everyone else was prey. That was simply how the universe worked. Then the humans came. And suddenly, everything the galaxy believed was being proven wrong. Admiral Chen Weyland had replaced her father as the leader of humanity's war effort. Marcus Chen had died in the second year of the war, killed when his flagship was destroyed covering the retreat of civilian transports. His daughter had taken command the same day. She had not wept. She had not mourned. She had simply looked at the tactical display and started planning the next battle. Wei Dashlin understood something that the Vrakther never had. Wars were not won only with weapons and ships. Wars were won with ideas. And the most powerful idea in the galaxy was simple. The Vrakther could be beaten. For 12,000 years. No one had believed this was possible. Now humanity was proving it every single day. And Weyland knew that this knowledge was more dangerous to the Dominion than any weapon. She began sending envoys to every conquered species. Not secretly. Not carefully. She announced her intentions openly, knowing the Vrakther would intercept her messages. She wanted them to know what she was doing. She wanted them to feel afraid. Her message to the conquered species was simple. Humanity was going to win this war. Not maybe. Not hopefully. Going to win. And when they won, the Dominion would fall. The question was simple. Did the conquered want to help? The responses came slowly at first. The species in the Galactic Council had been beaten for so long that they had forgotten how to hope. They had seen rebellions crushed. They had watched entire planets burned as punishment for resistance. They had learned that fighting the Vrakther meant death. But the humans were different. The humans were still alive after 3 years. The humans had destroyed more Vrakther warships than all other species combined. The humans kept winning battles that they should have lost. One by one, the conquered species began to answer Weyland's call. The Kithrans were the first. They were a small species, fragile and weak, but they had technology that no other species possessed. They understood nanotechnology at a level that seemed like magic. They could build machines smaller than cells, devices that could enter a body and heal it from the inside, or destroy it. They sent their scientists to Earth in secret ships. Within months, human soldiers carried nanomachines in their blood that could seal wounds, fight infections, and keep them fighting long after they should have died. Vrakther warriors found themselves facing enemies who refused to fall. The Fossick came next. They were record keepers, archivists who had documented 12,000 years of Vrakther conquest. They knew the location of every Dominion supply depot, every hidden base, every secret weapon cache. They shared everything with humanity. Suddenly, human fleets appeared at locations the Vrakther thought were secret. Supply convoys vanished. Weapon shipments were captured. The Dominion's logistics, the invisible foundation that supported their endless wars, began to crumble. The Remnerai volunteered as saboteurs. They were a species that the Vraekther had nearly driven to extinction. Only a few million remained, scattered across the galaxy in hiding. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They infiltrated Dominion space, destroying power plants, assassinating officers, and spreading chaos wherever they went. More species joined. The Verax, masters of encryption, broke Vraekther military codes. The Vesians, expert shipbuilders, designed new vessels that combined human creativity with alien technology. The Krell, once feared warriors before the Vraekther conquered them, began training alongside human marines. The Vraekther had spent 12,000 years teaching the galaxy to hate them. Now that hatred had found a champion, and it was turning into action. Supreme Fang Korvax watched his empire begin to crack. He ordered crackdowns on the conquered species. He burned colonies. He executed suspected traitors. But every act of cruelty only pushed more species toward the human alliance he did not understand. He was doing what the Vraekther had always done: crush resistance with overwhelming force, punish defiance with death, rule through fear. It had worked for 12,000 years. Why was it failing now? The answer came in a transmission from Admiral Wayland herself. She appeared on his screen without warning. His communications officers could not explain how she had bypassed their security. She simply appeared calm and confident, sitting in the command chair of a ship that was clearly not human in design. Wayland told Korvax that she had a gift for him. She transmitted a single file to his personal console. When he opened it, he found complete schematics of his own flagship. Every defense system, every weapon emplacement, every armor plate was detailed with perfect accuracy. There was more. Navigation routes his ship would take over the next month, patrol schedules for his personal guard, access codes to his private chambers, information that could only have come from someone in his inner circle. The message attached was short. It said that humanity could have used this information to kill him at any time. They could have sent assassins. They could have ambushed his flagship. They could have ended the war by cutting off the head of the snake. Instead, they were letting him know what they had. They were showing him that his own people were betraying him. They were demonstrating that his empire was rotting from the inside. The final line of the message burned itself into Korvax's memory. Run home. Tell your people what is coming. For the first time in 12,000 years, the hunters had become the hunted. The Vraekther had always been the ones who struck fear into their enemies. Now, fear was coming for them? Korvax recalled his fleets. He pulled his warriors back from human space. He abandoned dozens of conquered worlds to focus on defending the Dominion's core systems. His advisors called it strategic redeployment. Everyone else called it what it was: retreat. The Supreme Fang stood in his throne room and looked at the tactical display. Red lights marked systems lost to the enemy. Blue lights marked systems still under Vraekther control. 3 years ago, the display had been almost entirely blue. Now red was spreading like a disease. He had underestimated the humans. He had thought they were just another species to conquer. He had not understood that they were something entirely new, something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that got stronger when you tried to destroy them. A species that turned enemies into allies. A species that made the impossible look easy. Korvax made a decision. He would fortify the homeworld. He would gather every warship in the Dominion. He would make the humans pay for every inch of space and blood. And when they finally reached Korvax's prime, they would find a fortress world that had never been conquered. The Vraekther would show the galaxy what apex predators could do when cornered. But deep in his hearts, Korvax felt a truth he could not admit to anyone. The initiative had shifted. The momentum had changed, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the Vraekther were fighting not to conquer. They were fighting to survive. The Vraekther homeworld had never known invasion. For 12,000 years, Korvax's prime had been the sacred heart of the Dominion. No enemy fleet had ever come within 100 light-years of its surface. No alien foot had ever touched its soil. It was protected by defense platforms that could crack moons and weapons that could burn continents. The humans came anyway. The Allied fleet arrived in a single wave. 4,000 warships of every size and design. Human carriers flew alongside the Sea-In cruisers. Kithrin science vessels escorted Krell assault frigates. 32 species that had spent generations dreaming of this moment had gathered for the final battle. Admiral Wayland stood on the bridge of the EU's Liberation, the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. Through the viewports, she could see Corvax's Prime. It was a dark world, surface covered in black metal cities and massive fortresses. Even from orbit, it looked like a place of death. The Vrakther fleet moved to meet them. Over 3,000 warships, everything the Dominion had left. Supreme Fang Corvax himself commanded from his flagship. Determined to die fighting if he could not win, the battle began at sunrise on the homeworld. Below, human commanders employed tactics that the Vrakther could not understand. Wayland would order attacks, then suddenly pull back before achieving victory. Vrakther commanders saw weakness and pressed forward, only to find themselves surrounded by ships that had been waiting in ambush. Feints became traps. Retreats became advances. The humans fought like water, flowing around obstacles and striking where defenses were weakest. The Vrakther fought with the fury of cornered predators. They knew their entire species was watching. They knew that defeat meant the end of 12,000 years of dominion. They threw themselves at the Allied fleet with desperate courage, determined to take as many enemies with them as possible. The battle lasted 9 days. Ships died by the hundreds on both sides. The void around Corvax's Prime became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. Weapons that could destroy cities fired continuously. Shields that could withstand anything eventually failed. Warriors who had never known fear learned its taste. Throughout the fighting, Wayland did something that confused the Vrakther commanders. She kept broadcasting offers of surrender. Every few hours, her voice would echo through Vrakther communication systems. She offered life to those who laid down their weapons. She promised fair treatment for prisoners. She gave her word that any Vrakther who surrendered would not be harmed. The Vrakther High Council could not understand this. In their entire history, they had never offered mercy to an enemy. War meant death. Defeat meant extinction. That was the natural order. Why would predators give prey a chance to survive? A Kithrin ambassador had been assigned to the Liberation as an advisor. She was ancient by her species standards, old enough to remember when her people had been free. She listened to the Vrakther confusion with a strange smile. She explained it to the Allied commanders during a brief pause in the fighting. She said that the Vrakther did not understand humans because they thought in terms of predators and prey. Predators killed to eat. They destroyed because destruction was their nature. There was no negotiating with hunger. But humans were not predators. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. Survivors killed to protect. They fought to defend the things they loved. They made war not because they enjoyed it, but because something threatened what they cared about. And when the threat was gone, survivors could stop fighting. The Vrakther saw mercy as weakness. Humans saw mercy as strength. It took more courage to offer your enemy a chance to live than to simply kill them. It took more wisdom to see that enemies could become friends than to treat. Every conflict is a fight to the death. The humans were giving the Vrakther a choice. They could die as predators, fighting until the last ship burned and the last warrior fell. Or they could live as something new, something they had never been before. The choice was theirs. The High Council refused to surrender. They would not become prey. They would not submit to species they had conquered and enslaved. They would die with honor, as Vrakther had always died. Wayland received their answer. She closed her eyes for a moment. Some of her officers thought they saw grief in her expression. Grief not for the coming deaths of her own people, but for the Vrakther, who had chosen extinction over change. She opened her eyes. She gave the order. The Allied fleet pressed forward with everything they had. Human marines boarded Vrakther ships and fought room by room. Deshan vessels rammed enemy cruisers, their crews evacuating seconds before impact. Kithra Nanomacini swarms devoured the hulls of Rakthor frigates on the orbital stations around Corvax's Prime. Fighting was even more brutal. Vrakther warriors and human marines met in corridors too narrow for tactics. It became a battle of wills, of determination. Of who wanted victory more? A wounded human marine named Sarah Chen, no relation to the admiral, found herself cornered in a destroyed section of the main defense platform. 6 Vrakther warriors closed in on her. She had one working arm, half her blood on the floor, and a fusion charge strapped to her chest. The lead Vrakther warrior saw her reach for the detonation trigger. He spoke, his translator rendering his words in flat mechanical tones. He asked why she would die just to kill a few of his kind. It would not change the battle. It would not save her species. It was pointless. Sarah smiled. She told him about an ancient human philosopher who had said that a society grew great when old warriors planted trees whose shade they would never sit in. She was not dying for herself. She was dying so that others might live, so that the next group of Marines would find this corridor clear, so that the battle might tip just slightly toward victory. The Vrakther warrior did not understand. His species had no concept of sacrifice for strangers. They fought for themselves, for their clan, for personal glory. The idea of dying to help people you would never meet was alien to everything they believed. Sarah pressed the button. The explosion took out the entire deck. It destroyed the power distribution center for the station's main weapons. When Allied ships detected the drop in enemy fire, they pressed forward and seized the advantage. Sarah Chen would never know that her death had tipped the balance, that the breach she created allowed Allied forces to secure the station 6 hours faster than projected, that her sacrifice saved thousands of lives. But the Vrakther remembered. In the weeks and months that followed, they would speak of the human who died smiling. They would struggle to understand a species that counted victory and lives saved rather than enemies killed. They would wonder how they could ever defeat an enemy that saw death as just another weapon. The battle ended on the 9th day. The Vrakther fleet was destroyed. The orbital defenses were silenced. The Allied fleet moved into position above Korvax's prime. Supreme Fang Korvax stood in his throne room as the end approached. He had one final choice to make. He could trigger the planetary defense grid and burn the Allied fleet from the sky, at the cost of destroying half his own world, or he could accept that the war was lost. He looked at the display showing Allied ships in orbit. Humans had come to his homeworld. They had done what no species in 12,000 years had accomplished. They had won. But even now, even with victory in their grasp, they were broadcasting offers of surrender. Korvax finally understood what made humans different. They were not fighting to destroy the Vrakther. They were fighting to free the galaxy. And once the galaxy was free, they had no more reason to fight. The Supreme Fang deactivated the defense grid. He opened a channel to the Allied fleet, and for the first time in the history of his species, a Vrakther leader spoke the words that had never been spoken. He surrendered. The war was over. The Dominion had fallen, and the galaxy would never be the same. 100 years had passed since the SCSV fall of Korvax's prime. The galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Vrakther Dominion was gone. Not destroyed, as many had expected. Not exterminated, as the Vrakther themselves would have done to a defeated enemy. Instead, humanity had done something that no one had predicted. Something that the Vrakther considered worse than extinction. They had offered peace. Real peace. Not the false peace of conquest, where the victor ruled and the defeated served. True peace, where former enemies became partners. Where species that had hated each other for generations learned to work together. The Vrakther had expected death. They had prepared for it. Their warriors had planned to fight to the end, taking as many enemies with them as possible. Their leaders had written final messages to history, proclaiming that the Vrakther would never submit, but the humans did not want submission. They wanted transformation in the years following the war. Human psychologists and educators worked with Vrakther communities. They did not try to erase Vrakther culture. They did not punish the species for the crimes of their ancestors. Instead, they asked a simple question. What could the Vrakther become if they stopped being predators? It was not easy. 12,000 years of instinct and tradition did not vanish overnight. Many older Vrakther refused to change. They called the new ways a corruption of their nature. They said that living alongside former prey was a humiliation worse than death. But their children saw things differently. Vreigthur Young grew up on colony worlds alongside human children. They played together. They learned together. They discovered that the species their parents had called prey were not inferior. They were just different. Different in ways that made the galaxy more interesting, more complex, more alive. The Vreigthur had always defined themselves by what they could destroy. The new generation began to define themselves by what they could build. Some became doctors, using their knowledge of alien biology to heal rather than harm. Others became engineers, designing ships and stations that served peaceful purposes. A few even became teachers, helping young Vreigthur understand a galaxy that no longer operated on the simple logic of predator and prey. The Galactic Unity Council replaced the old Galactic Council. It was not a coalition of conquered species serving a master. It was a true alliance, where every member had an equal voice. Decisions were made through discussion and compromise, not threats and force. Humanity took no special position in this new order. They had no empire, no tribute worlds, no subject species. They asked only for peace and cooperation. Many species offered to make them rulers in gratitude for liberation. The humans refused every offer. They explained that they had not fought to replace one empire with another. They had fought to create something new. A galaxy where no species was predator or prey, where every civilization had the right to exist and grow and make its own choices. Some thought this was weakness. Others thought it was foolishness. But the younger generations, the ones who had grown up after the war, saw it differently. They saw it as strength. It took more strength to forgive than to punish. It took more courage to trust than to fear. It took more wisdom to build than to destroy. The humans understood this truth, and slowly the galaxy was learning it too, 100 years after the war. A Vreigthur historian named Vexari addressed the Galactic Unity Council. She was young by Vreigthur standards, barely 200 years old. Her great-grandmother had fought at Corvax's prime. Her grandmother had been one of the first, Vreigthur, to work alongside humans in the rebuilding effort. Her mother had married a Krell, something that would have been unthinkable in the old days. Vexari stood before representatives of 100 species. Behind her, a holographic display showed images from the Old Dominion. Vreigthur warriors in their black armor, conquered worlds burning. The symbols of 12,000 years of terror. She spoke about the psychology of apex species. She explained how the Vreigthur had believed themselves eternal because they had never faced a real challenge. They had looked at the universe and seen only a hierarchy of hunters and hunted. They had placed themselves at the top and assumed they would stay there forever. They had never considered that the hierarchy might be wrong, that the universe did not actually care who was biggest or strongest, that survival depended not on being the most powerful, but on being the most adaptable. Then she spoke about humanity. She described a species that had spent its evolutionary history at the bottom of the food chain. Humans had been hunted by predators for hundreds of thousands of years. They had nearly been wiped out by ice ages, plagues, famines, and 1,000 other disasters. They had every reason to give up, to accept that they were prey, to fade into extinction. Instead, they had adapted. They had learned. They had survived by the time the Vreigthur found them. Humans had already beaten every challenge their world could throw at them. They had climbed every mountain, crossed every ocean, and walked on their own moon. They had split atoms and mapped genomes and built thinking machines. The Vreigthur had seen humans as weak prey. They had not understood that weakness and prey were not the same thing. Humans were small and soft and fragile, but they were also stubborn and creative and utterly unwilling to accept defeat. Vexari paused and looked at the human delegation. 100 years ago, their ancestors had come to Corvax's prime as conquerors. Today, their descendants sat as equals among the species they had freed. She finished her speech with words that would be remembered for generations. We called ourselves Alpha because we had never lost. Humans called themselves survivors because they had never stopped losing and never stopped getting back up. We were the galaxy's apex predators. They were the universe's most stubborn species. History has shown which one matters more. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the representatives began to applaud. Humans and Vrakther and 100 other species, clapping together in appreciation of a truth that had taken a century to fully understand. In the observation gallery above the chamber, a young human child tugged on her friend's arm. The friend was a Vrakther, a girl whose family had lived alongside humans for 3 generations. They had grown up together, played together, studied together. The old hatreds were ancient history to them. The human child asked what the history lesson was about. She was too young to understand the complex politics and psychology that Vexari had discussed. She just knew that the adults seemed very serious about something that had happened a long time ago. The young Vrakther smiled. It was not the smile of a predator baring teeth. It was the smile of a friend sharing a simple truth. She explained that it was about how humans had taught her. Species an important lesson. Being the strongest was not the same as being the best. The human child nodded, not fully understanding, but accepting the answer. She asked if they could go get lunch. The Vrakther agreed, and the 2 children walked off together, already forgetting the serious matters of the adults. Behind them, in the great hall of the Unity Council, a new era continued to unfold. An era built not on fear and domination, but on cooperation and mutual respect. An era that would have been impossible without the stubbornness of a small species from a blue planet who had refused to accept their place in someone else's hierarchy. The Vrakther Dominion had a simple epitaph in the historical archives. It read, "They believed themselves the end of evolution. They were merely a lesson for those who came after. But humanity needed no epitaph. Their story was still being written, and if their history was any guide, it would continue to be written for a very long time. After all, survivors had a habit of sticking around.